Hades is an isometric hack and slash roguelite from Supergiant Games, and it released sometime in the 21st century when humanity was arguably at its creative peak. I don't know why I said that. It was released in September 2020 after almost 2 years of early access. It's not a new game right now as I record this, and it can only be less new by the time that you listen. The game sees you take control of Zagreus, son of Hades, while he attempts to escape from his father's hellish domain, also known as Hades. That's a little bit weird, having the character and the place share a name, but I guess if it's a problem, we'll need to take that up with Greek mythology. Anyway, like most denizens of Hades, Zagreus would like to leave. And therein lies the premise of this roguelite adventure. I love Hades. And this review is basically just a bit of self-indulgence for me, because years after playing the game through, I still like to talk about it. I'm not typically a fan of roguelike or roguelite games at all. The core concept of going through the same places and enemies over and over again, it never appeals to me. I don't have enough time or any appetite to repeatedly consume the same content on loop. That was true before Hades, it remains true after Hades, but it does not apply to Hades. The game oozes quality and polish in everything that it does, from combat to characters to music, but its greatest feats are in the way that it serves the player power and incentive. It gives you some flavour of awesome every time you run through an escape attempt, and then it shows you the promise of more flavours of awesome if you have another go, over and over again. In terms of scope, Hades could be considered quite small if you look at it all wrong. A successful journey to the end is not a long one, but of course the measure of a roguelike isn't determined by what you see on a single run. And while Hades isn't long, it certainly has a breadth to it, and it's terrifically well layered. It's quite hard to pinpoint just what makes its formula so addictive, but I'm convinced that the way that it peels back those layers, the cadence and delivery of empowering systems and story beats, is a key ingredient to my enjoyment. If you haven't played Hades yet, I don't want to spoil those surprises or tarnish your experience. Same with any game that I review. So all the footage in this review is taken from first runs that barely scratch the surface, and I'm going to carefully talk around a lot of the cool stuff that Zagreus gets to play with. With that in mind, let's get into some spoiler-free detail before giving the game a rating. Hades looks, well, you can see it on the screen. The characters and environments started life as paintings and were then brought to life as 3D assets that retain their fine lines and stylings. It isn't a tech showcase that demands you throw the world's best hardware at it. You can play Hades perfectly well on a Nintendo Switch if you like, but it's definitely easy on the eye in its own way and has a really distinct character. The original soundtrack is exceptional, with its core dong 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 tone etched into my audio memory banks forever. I can't recall it, I'm tone deaf, but that was my best approximation. And music tracks that I could fight demons to, or just keep on in the background while I go about my life. It really is very, very good. Zagreus and the many denizens of Hades and Olympus are voiced, with a narrator adding flavour as you venture forth. Zagreus sometimes responds directly to the narrator's lines in a way that would ordinarily be detrimental to immersion. That is, if it weren't also charming in its execution. But it is charming in its execution. The full cast of characters possess more charm and more charisma than most games can touch, let alone games in the roguelike genre. Roguelikes aren't typically associated with strong character-driven storytelling. Sometimes they serve you a good mystery that you can piece together as you play, but they're usually light on characters and frankly not associated with big budgets that cover a cast of quality voice actors. I don't think that Hades takes itself too seriously, but it hits a good tone. It's all very endearing. Hades could have all of the charisma, fantastic art and music, and intricately designed roguelite elements, but it wouldn't matter if the simple act of fighting through its encounters wasn't fun. I say simple act. At a surface level, the combat in Hades could be considered simple. You've got an attack, a special attack, a magic spell, and a dash. That leaves a lot of empty buttons on your typical controller. So it's simple in the sense that it's easy to pick up and play. Those 4 core skills offer a wealth of options and power, but it's worth looking beneath the surface level before talking about what you can build on top of it. Combat in Hades is exceptionally responsive and smooth. Zagreus can blend between dashing and attacking, casting and slashing in any direction without any stickiness or jank, and it looks and feels just right. His attacks will knock back and micro-stagger enemies, at least those without armor, in such a way that hitting them feels satisfying, and it sets you on top, dominant in the moments of aggression. In fact, the whole combat system is geared to feel good in subtle ways. If the devil is in the detail, then that devil supports Zagreus. The intricate timing of hits and dodges just leans in your favour in such a way that when you do take damage or meet a fatal, it feels fair. I've said the word feels an awful lot there, and it wasn't an accident. I want you to know that the core foundation of combat in Hades is tuned with expert care and attention, and that manifests as moment-to-moment gameplay that feels just right. That's the foundation that you build on with all kinds of incredible stuff. Many of the game's overlapping systems, both within the confines of a run-through and in the overall meta, will change the offensive and defensive functionality of each of those core abilities. Even in these first runs that I used to capture footage, I could have my dash leave a hazardous rift blade where I stood, or have it deflect projectiles back at an attacker. My spell could be a short defensive blast or a cloud of damage and disruption. These sorts of variations are really just barely scratching the surface of the combat diversity and sheer power that you'll be presented with as the game progresses. And it continues to feel fantastic, because it's all built on that excellent foundation. I've waxed lyrical about the combat, but I said earlier that the game's greatest feat is the way that it makes you feel so powerful, and the way that it incentivizes you to keep going. The loop that defines the game as a roguelike and defies the usual truth that repetition is boring. On your very first escape attempt, you're offered branching choices, and even in such an early phase of the game, when so much is obfuscated from you, the choices are quite compelling. From the first moments, you're choosing between powerful upgrades for your core abilities, and there aren't clear right or wrong answers. They're pretty much all good options. Then as you progress, assuming you survive long enough, you're presented with more choices, perhaps some that might synergize really well with the stuff that you already have. When you're a bit further into the game, you'll have a much wider breadth of potential choices to make, and a better understanding of what you want to pursue. But the options that you have, they shift and they change, so you have to think on your feet. The game asks you so many questions, with so many right answers to choose from, and almost invariably you get to build out a cool version of Zagreus. A taste of awesome power and style. Then you die. In many roguelikes, that's the point that I would stop and never play again. In Hades, that's the point where the game peels back a layer or two and shows me something new that I need to play with. Some additional toy or progression mechanic that not only makes you more powerful, but often totally shakes up the systems that you are already accustomed to, opens up new depths to choices and new synergies to explore. The story reveals itself in lockstep with these gameplay systems. There's a lot of characters to meet, dialogue and relationships unfold as you continue to encounter them on your journey, and there's a lot of layers here as well, and Supergiant seems to know just when to shake things up as you go. As the breadth of choice continues to expand, you obviously become ever more powerful, and your march towards the exit gets more and more feasible, perhaps even inevitable, and the game manages to stay fresh and enjoyable the whole way, still revealing more of itself up to and beyond the final credits. The only criticisms that I can really level at the game are that there are a couple of difficulty spikes that might prove to be too spiky for some people, and a couple of systems of progression sit as slightly grindy outliers to the overall pacing. But these might not even be real flaws. These systems might gel perfectly for someone else. I'm limited to my own perspective, and I can see that these systems might pace up differently for somebody else. They might fit in better than they did for me. But by the same token, maybe some of the other systems won't fit as nicely. I'm really reaching for something to criticize there. This is the end of a review in which I am not sure that I've uttered a single valid complaint, or not one that felt significant. This is actually the reason that I went back and reviewed a game from 2018, as it sits at an extreme on one part of the scale that I'm trying to establish. It's near flawless in its execution. In terms of scope, I think it's fair to say that Hades is a relatively small and very refined game, elevated by its breadth and intricate layering, but far away from a big budget, cutting edge title. So I'm going with a D for scope, and a 98 for the near perfect execution. It's a rare gem of a game. I'm not even sure how you're supposed to improve on it, but Hades 2 is in the works, and I can't wait to see if Supergiant can do it again. Thanks for watching this, and please do subscribe for more reviews in this format. Let me know what you think of Hades.